Question 1. The audit findings indicate that a contractor submitted a deliverable for a critical system component that, upon initial review, appears to deviate from the technical specifications outlined in the statement of work. So, the contracting officer's representative, CORE, has informally communicated concerns to the contractor, but has not yet issued a formal rejection or requested specific corrective actions. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliant course of action for the contracting officer, CO, to take regarding this deliverable? Option A. Accept the deliverable with a note of caution, assuming the contractor will address the perceived deviations in subsequent deliveries or through a future contract modification. Option B. Formally reject the deliverable in writing, clearly detailing the specific deviations from the SOW and referencing the relevant contract clauses, and request a detailed corrective action plan from the contractor within a specified timeframe. Option C. Proceed with payment for the deliverable, as the COR has indicated informal concerns, and wait for the contractor to voluntarily propose any necessary adjustments. Option D. Immediately issue a stop work order to the contractor until all perceived deviations are fully resolved, without providing specific details of the nonconformance. The correct answer is B. Formally reject the deliverable in writing, clearly detailing the specific deviations from the SOW and referencing the relevant contract clauses, and request a detailed corrective action plan from the contractor within a specified timeframe. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breakdown in the contract closeout process, specifically concerning the acceptance and rejection of contract deliverables. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the contracting officer, CO, to balance the government's need for timely and compliant deliverables with the contractor's right to receive fair consideration and clear guidance. Improper handling of deliverables can lead to disputes, financial penalties, delays in program execution, and damage to the government-contractor relationship. Careful judgment is required to ensure adherence to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, while maintaining program integrity. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the contract terms, including the statement of work and any incorporated specifications, to determine if the delivered item or service meets the contractually defined requirements. If deficiencies are identified, the CO must formally notify the contractor in writing, clearly articulating the nature of the nonconformance and referencing the specific contract clauses that have been violated. This notification should also specify the corrective actions required and a reasonable timeframe for their completion. This aligns with FAR Part 46, specifically concerning inspection and acceptance of supplies and services, which mandates that acceptance should not occur if the supplies or services are nonconforming. The CO's responsibility is to ensure that the government receives what it contracted for, and this requires a systematic process of evaluation. If necessary, rejection with clear communication. An incorrect approach would be to accept non-conforming deliverables without proper documentation or a plan for correction. This fails to uphold the government's right to receive conforming goods or services as stipulated in the contract, and violates the principles of sound contract administration outlined in FAR Part 46. Ethically, it could be seen as a dereliction of duty, as it does not ensure the government receives full value for its expenditure. Another incorrect approach would be to reject deliverables without providing the contractor with specific, actionable feedback regarding the deficiencies. This lack of clarity prevents the contractor from understanding the issues and making necessary corrections, potentially leading to unnecessary disputes and delays. It also fails to meet the spirit of FAR Part 46, which encourages a collaborative approach to resolving nonconformances where possible. A third incorrect approach would be to unilaterally impose corrective actions not explicitly defined in the contract or agreed upon through a formal modification. While the CO has the authority to direct corrective actions for non-conforming deliverables, these actions must be reasonable, directly related to the identified deficiencies, and consistent with the contract scope. Overstepping these bounds can lead to contractor claims and legal challenges. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a clear understanding of the contract requirements. The CO must then meticulously evaluate the delivered item or service against these requirements. If nonconformance is found, the next step is to consult the relevant FAR clauses e.g. FAR 46. 4. Inspection of supplies and services, to ensure the notification and corrective action process is followed precisely. This includes documenting all communications and decisions, and seeking legal counsel if the situation is complex or involves significant financial implications. The overarching principle is to ensure contract compliance while fostering a fair and transparent process for both the government and the contractor. Question 2. Benchmark analysis indicates that a federal agency requires specialized cybersecurity consulting services for a new complex project. The agency's contracting officer is aware of several existing government-wide acquisition contracts, GWAC, and multiple award schedules, MAS, that offer cybersecurity services. The contracting officer needs to determine the most appropriate method for acquiring these services, considering efficiency, compliance, best value. Option A. Initiate a new, full, and open competitive procurement for the cybersecurity services, bypassing the existing GWAC and MAS. Option B. Modify an existing MAS contract for office supplies to include the cybersecurity consulting services, as it is a more familiar contract vehicle. Option C. Issue a sole source task order against a GWAC that has a broad cybersecurity category, assuming the vendor has the necessary expertise. Option D. Conduct market research to identify relevant GWAC and MAS contracts, review their terms and conditions, and then solicit proposals from multiple awardees on the most appropriate contract vehicle to ensure fair opportunity and best value. Correct answer is C. Issue a sole source task order against a GWAC that has a broad cybersecurity category, assuming the vendor has the necessary expertise. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in federal contracting, effectively leveraging government-wide acquisition contracts, GWAC, and multiple award schedules, MAS, to meet agency needs while ensuring compliance and best value. The professional challenge lies in balancing the speed and convenience of these contract vehicles with the fundamental principles of fair opportunity, competition, and responsible acquisition. A contracting officer must navigate the specific ordering procedures and limitations of each vehicle to avoid potential protests and ensure the government receives the best possible outcome. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the specific GWAC or MAS contract's terms and conditions, including any agency-specific guidance or limitations on its use. It requires the contracting officer to conduct a needs assessment and then determine if the available GWAC or MAS contracts can satisfy those needs in a manner that provides fair opportunity to all awardees on the contract. This includes understanding the ordering procedures, such as requesting quotes from multiple vendors on the schedule or GWAC, and documenting the selection process to demonstrate that the best value was obtained. This aligns with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 8, which governs the use of GSA schedules and other GWAC, and emphasizes fair opportunity when multiple awardees exist. An incorrect approach would be to simply select the first vendor that comes to mind or the one with whom the agency has had previous dealings, without considering other available options on the GWAC or MAS. This fails to provide fair opportunity to all contract holders and can lead to protests. Another incorrect approach is to bypass the GWAC or MAS entirely and initiate a new competitive procurement when the requirements clearly fall within the scope of an existing contract vehicle. This is inefficient and undermines the purpose of these established contracts. Finally, an incorrect approach is to modify the scope of the GWAC or MAS contract to fit a requirement that is outside its original scope, which is a violation of the contract's terms and the FAR. The professional decision-making process should begin with a clear definition of the agency's needs. Then, the contracting officer should identify relevant GWAC and MAS contracts that could potentially fulfill those needs. For each relevant contract, the officer must review its specific terms, conditions, and ordering procedures. The next step is to determine if fair opportunity can be provided to multiple awardees on the selected contract vehicle. If fair opportunity is required and feasible, the officer should solicit quotes from a sufficient number of awardees to ensure competition and best value. The selection and award must be well documented, justifying the chosen vendor based on the evaluation criteria and the best value determination. If the needs cannot be met through existing GWAC or MAS contracts, or if fair opportunity cannot be adequately provided, then a different procurement approach may be necessary. Question 3. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of exceeding contract delivery timelines, and as a gesture of appreciation for the contractor's excellent performance, the contractor's program manager offers the FACC certified contracting officer a high-value gift certificate to a popular online retailer. Option A. Accept the gift certificate and discreetly use it, assuming that such a small gesture would not impact the integrity of future procurements. Option B. Politely decline the gift certificate, explaining that accepting it would violate federal ethics regulations regarding gifts from contractors and reaffirming the commitment to a fair and impartial contracting relationship. Option C. Accept the gift certificate, considering it a small token of appreciation for outstanding performance and a way to foster a positive working relationship. Option D. Accept the gift certificate, but offer to return it later if it is deemed inappropriate by the agency's ethics office. The correct answer is B. Politely decline the gift certificate, explaining that accepting it would violate federal ethics regulations regarding gifts from contractors and reaffirming the commitment to a fair and impartial contracting relationship. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a contractor's desire to maintain a positive working relationship and the stringent ethical requirements of government contracting. The FACC holder is tasked with upholding the integrity of the procurement process, which necessitates impartiality and adherence to regulations, even when faced with potential personal or professional repercussions. The core of the challenge lies in navigating the gray area, where a seemingly minor gesture of goodwill could be misconstrued or could create an appearance of impropriety, thereby violating procurement integrity standards. The correct approach involves a clear and immediate rejection of the offer, coupled with a professional explanation of why it cannot be accepted, referencing the relevant ethical standards. This upholds the principle of procurement integrity by preventing any perception of favoritism or undue influence. Specifically, Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 3, Improper Business Practices and Personal Conflicts of Interest, and the Standards of Ethical Conduct for Employees of the Executive Branch, 5 CFR Part 2635, are paramount. These regulations prohibit accepting gifts or favors that could influence official actions or create an appearance of impropriety. By declining the offer and explaining the ethical constraints, the FACC holder demonstrates a commitment to these principles, ensuring fair and impartial competition. An incorrect approach would be to accept the offer, rationalizing it as a minor gesture or a way to foster goodwill. This directly violates FAR 3-101-1, General Policy, which states that contractors shall not offer or give any gifts or favors to government employees that might influence the employee's official actions. Accepting such an offer creates an appearance of impropriety and can undermine public trust in the government contracting process. It also violates the spirit of procurement integrity, which demands that all decisions be made based on merit and in the best interest of the government, free from any external pressures or inducements. Another incorrect approach would be to accept the offer but attempt to conceal it or downplay its significance. This is ethically unsound and potentially illegal. Transparency and honesty are fundamental to government contracting. Concealing such an offer suggests an awareness of its impropriety and an attempt to circumvent ethical obligations. This behavior erodes trust and can lead to severe disciplinary actions, including termination and debarment. A third incorrect approach would be to accept the offer and then report it later, hoping for retroactive approval or leniency. While reporting is generally encouraged, accepting the offer first negates the preventative aspect of ethical conduct. The damage to the appearance of impartiality has already occurred. Ethical guidelines emphasize proactive adherence to standards, not retrospective justification of violations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive assessment of any offer or situation that could create a conflict of interest or the appearance of one. This includes understanding the relevant FAR provisions and the standards of ethical conduct. When faced with such a situation, the FACC holder should immediately consider the potential impact on procurement integrity and impartiality. The default action should be to decline any offer that could be construed as a gift or favor that might influence official duties. If there is any doubt, seeking guidance from agency ethics officials or legal counsel is the most prudent course of action. Maintaining a clear separation between personal interests and official duties is the cornerstone of ethical government contracting. Question 4. The audit findings indicate that the statement of work for a recent acquisition may not fully align with the principles of performance-based acquisition, PBA, and could be overly prescriptive. Which of the following approaches best addresses these findings and ensures compliance with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 37 Requirements for Requirements Development. Option A. Revise the SOW to incorporate all details from the initial needs assessment, ensuring every step of the process is explicitly described to avoid ambiguity. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the initial needs assessment, market research findings, and any preliminary technical guidance to synthesize a SOW that clearly defines performance outcomes and measurable standards. Option C. Focus on developing highly detailed technical specifications that outline the exact materials, methods, and processes the contractor must use to achieve the desired outcome. Option D. Prioritize the findings from market research to identify common industry practices and build the SOW around those established methods, assuming they meet the agency's general objectives. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the initial needs assessment, market research findings, and any preliminary technical guidance to synthesize a SOW that clearly defines performance outcomes and measurable standards. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a contracting professional to reconcile potentially conflicting information derived from different sources during the requirements development phase. The challenge lies in ensuring that the final statement of work accurately reflects the agency's needs while adhering to the principles of performance-based acquisition, PBA, and avoiding the pitfalls of overly prescriptive or vague specifications. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for clear deliverables with the flexibility inherent in PBA. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all available documentation, including the initial needs assessment, market research, and any preliminary technical guidance, to synthesize a comprehensive and accurate SOW. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the audit findings by ensuring the SOW is grounded in a clear understanding of performance outcomes. Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 37, specifically FAR 37-102, mandates the use of performance-based acquisition to the maximum extent practicable. A well-developed SOW as part of this process should define the required results rather than the methods of performance. This ensures that the contractor has the flexibility to innovate while meeting the government's objectives, which is the core tenet of PBA. An approach that focuses solely on the initial needs assessment without considering market research or technical guidance is incorrect, because it risks creating an SOW that is either unachievable, overly restrictive, or does not leverage potential contractor innovation. This failure violates the spirit of PBA by potentially dictating methods rather than outcomes. An approach that prioritizes detailed technical specifications over performance outcomes is incorrect because it directly contradicts the principles of performance-based acquisition. FAR 37-102A emphasizes defining performance standards and outcomes. Overly detailed specifications can stifle competition and innovation, leading to higher costs and potentially less effective solutions, as the government dictates how the work must be done rather than what results are required. An approach that relies exclusively on market research, without a clear understanding of the agency's specific needs, is incorrect, because it may lead to an SOW that is misaligned with the agency's actual requirements. While market research is crucial for understanding what is feasible and identifying potential solutions, it must be guided by a well-defined set of agency needs to ensure the resulting SOW is relevant and effective. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all relevant documentation, starting with the agency's identified needs. This should be followed by thorough market research to understand available solutions and contractor capabilities. The insights gained from both should then be synthesized into a draft SOW that clearly articulates performance outcomes, measurable standards, and acceptable quality levels, in accordance with FAR Part 37. The SOW should then be reviewed by technical experts and stakeholders to ensure it is comprehensive, realistic, and aligned with PBA principles before finalization. Question 5. The performance metrics show a consistent shortfall in achieving key deliverables for a recently awarded service contract. The initial market research conducted during the acquisition planning phase did not identify any alternative solutions that appeared significantly more capable or cost-effective at that time. Given these performance issues, which of the following actions best reflects a proactive and compliant approach to acquisition planning and strategy development under the FACC framework? Option A. Conduct updated market research to identify current industry capabilities and potential alternative solutions that may have emerged since the initial research, and then revise the acquisition strategy accordingly. Option B. Initiate a new acquisition process from scratch, discarding the current contract and all prior planning efforts due to the performance issues. Option C. Immediately revise the contract requirements to align with what the contractor is currently able to deliver, assuming the initial requirements were overly ambitious. Option D. Proceed with the current acquisition strategy and contractor, focusing solely on performance improvement plans without further investigation into market alternatives. The correct answer is A. Conduct updated market research to identify current industry capabilities and potential alternative solutions that may have emerged since the initial research, and then revise the acquisition strategy accordingly. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in federal acquisition, where initial market research may not fully capture the evolving landscape of available solutions, leading to a potential mismatch between defined requirements and the most effective acquisition strategy. The core professional challenge lies in balancing the need for timely acquisition with the imperative to ensure the government obtains the best value, which necessitates a dynamic and responsive approach to market research and strategy development. Careful judgment is required to avoid locking into an outdated strategy based on incomplete or outdated information. The correct approach involves a proactive and iterative process of market research that directly informs the acquisition strategy. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of FAR Part 10, Market Research, and FAR Part 37, Service Contracting, emphasizing the need to understand the marketplace to the maximum extent practicable before issuing solicitations. By revisiting market research when performance metrics indicate potential issues, the contracting professional demonstrates a commitment to obtaining the best value and fulfilling the agency's needs effectively. This iterative process ensures that the acquisition strategy remains aligned with current market capabilities and technological advancements, thereby promoting competition and innovation. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the initial market research without reevaluation, even when performance metrics suggest a deficiency, fails to meet the regulatory requirement for continuous market research. This can lead to a suboptimal acquisition, potentially excluding innovative solutions or more cost-effective alternatives that have emerged since the initial research was conducted. Ethically, it represents a failure to act in the best interest of the government by not seeking the most advantageous outcome. Another incorrect approach, which involves immediately revising the requirements without further market research to understand why the performance metrics are not being met, is also flawed. This bypasses the critical step of diagnosing the root cause of the performance issues. It risks creating new requirements that may not be achievable or may not address the underlying problem, leading to wasted resources and continued dissatisfaction. This approach neglects the fundamental principle of understanding the market's capacity to meet needs. A third incorrect approach, which involves proceeding with the current acquisition strategy despite clear indications from performance metrics that it is not yielding desired results, is a direct contravention of sound acquisition principles. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adapt to changing circumstances. It can result in a contract that is not meeting its intended purpose, leading to potential waste, fraud, and abuse, and ultimately failing to deliver the required services or goods to the government. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Acknowledge and analyze performance data. Treat performance metrics as critical feedback loops. 2. Re-engage in market research. If performance is suboptimal, the first step is to understand the current market landscape. This may involve updated sources, industry days, or requests for information. 3. Diagnose the root cause. Determine if the issue stems from the requirements, the acquisition strategy, the contractor's performance, or a combination thereof. 4. Adapt the acquisition strategy. Based on the updated market research and diagnosis, revise the acquisition strategy to address identified shortcomings and leverage current market opportunities. 5. Document all decisions. Maintain a clear record of market research, analysis, and strategic adjustments. Question 6. The monitoring system demonstrates that a contracting officer consistently selects requests for proposals (RFP) for procurements where the agency has a precisely defined statement of work, and the primary evaluation factor is the lowest price. This practice is being reviewed for compliance with federal acquisition regulations. Which of the following actions would be the most appropriate response to address this observed pattern? Option A. Suggest the contracting officer utilize requests for quotations (RFQ) for these procurements, as RFQs are generally faster and more efficient for well-defined needs. Option B. Recommend that the contracting officer continue using RFPs, but emphasize the importance of conducting thorough technical evaluations to justify the selection of the lowest-priced technically acceptable offer. Option C. Advise the contracting officer to transition to using invitations for bids if, for these types of procurements, as IFBs are designed for situations with definitive requirements and price-based evaluations, ensuring maximum competition on price. Option D. Instruct the contracting officer to develop more detailed statements of work for future procurement to justify the continued use of RFPs for complex acquisition. The correct answer is C. Advise the contracting officer to transition to using invitations for bids if, for these types of procurements, as IFBs are designed for situations with definitive requirements and price-based evaluations, ensuring maximum competition on price. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in federal contracting, ensuring the appropriate solicitation method is selected and executed to achieve fair and open competition while meeting agency needs. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the nature of the requirement and the level of detail available to potential offerors. Misjudging this can lead to ineffective solicitations, protests, delays, and potentially suboptimal contract awards. Careful judgment is required to align the solicitation method with the clarity and definiteness of the agency's needs. The correct approach involves selecting the invitation for bids if, when the agency has a clear, detailed, and definitive statement of work, and the award will be made solely on the basis of the lowest price. This method is designed for procurements where the specifications are so precise that only one responsible bidder can meet them. The Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 14, outlines the procedures for sealed bidding, emphasizing price as the primary evaluation factor. Using an IFB in this context ensures maximum competition on price among responsible sources, fulfilling the principle of providing the government with the lowest possible price for goods or services that meet the stated requirements. An incorrect approach would be to use a request for quotation, RFQ, when the requirement is complex and requires detailed technical proposals and extensive evaluation beyond just price. RFQs are generally used for simplified acquisitions of supplies or services that are commercial items, or for other acquisitions where the price is the only determining factor and the need is well defined. Using an RFQ for a complex requirement that necessitates technical evaluation would fail to elicit the necessary technical information for a proper award decision, potentially leading to an award to a vendor who cannot technically meet the need. Or it could be protested for not allowing for adequate technical comparison. Another incorrect approach would be to use a request for proposal, RFP, when the requirement is so simple and well-defined that price is the sole determining factor and no discussions are anticipated. RFPs are used for negotiated procurements and allow for discussions with offerors. Employing an RFP for a straightforward, price-driven requirement is inefficient, adds unnecessary administrative burden, and can create confusion about the evaluation process, potentially leading to protests that the agency did not conduct a sealed bid procurement as required by FAR Part 14 when appropriate. Finally, using an IFB when the agency's needs are not fully defined and require innovative solutions or detailed technical approaches would be incorrect. IFBs are not suitable for situations where the agency needs to explore different technical solutions or where the statement of work is not definitive enough to allow for a purely price-based evaluation. This would likely result in non-responsive bids or a contract that does not meet the agency's actual needs, leading to potential contract modifications or disputes. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the agency's requirement. This involves clearly defining the scope of work, the technical specifications, and the evaluation criteria. The contracting professional must then consult the FAR, specifically Part 14 for sealed bidding if, Part 15 for contracting by negotiation RFP, and Part 13 for simplified acquisition procedures, which often utilize RFQs. The key is to match the definiteness of the requirement and the primary evaluation factor, price vs. best value to the appropriate solicitation method. If the requirement is well-defined and price is the sole factor, sealed bidding, if, is generally preferred. If the requirement allows for multiple solutions or requires technical evaluation, negotiation RFP is appropriate. RFQs are typically for simpler, commercial items or well-defined needs where price is the primary driver, and the acquisition is within simplified acquisition thresholds. Question 7. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a contractor performing a service contract has identified a need to expand the scope of services significantly beyond what was originally defined in the contract to meet evolving mission requirements. The contractor has proposed performing this expanded work, and there is a strong desire from the program office to proceed quickly to ensure mission continuity. As the contracting officer, what is the most appropriate course of action to formally incorporate this expanded scope of work? Option A. Execute a supplemental agreement to formally incorporate the expanded scope of work, including any necessary adjustments to price and schedule, after proper review and approval. Option B. Issue a unilateral change order for the expanded scope of work without further negotiation or agreement from the contractor. Option C. Proceed with the expanded work based on verbal direction from the program office, with the understanding that a formal modification will be processed later. Option D. Initiate a novation agreement to transfer the contract to a new entity that can handle the expanded scope. The correct answer is A. Execute a supplemental agreement to formally incorporate the expanded scope of work, including any necessary adjustments to price and schedule, after proper review and approval. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a contracting officer to navigate the complexities of contract modifications, while balancing the need for timely project completion with adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. The core challenge lies in determining the appropriate mechanism to address an unforeseen scope expansion that deviates from the original contract's intent without improperly obligating government funds or circumventing established procurement procedures. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any modification is legally sound, fiscally responsible, and maintains the integrity of the acquisition process. The correct approach involves formally documenting the change through a supplemental agreement, which is the appropriate mechanism for mutually agreeing to modify the terms of an existing contract. This process ensures that the change is properly reviewed, justified, and funded, and that both parties understand and agree to the revised scope and cost. This aligns with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 43, which governs contract modifications. Specifically, FAR 43. 102 mandates that contract modifications be in writing and executed by authorized representatives of both parties. A supplemental agreement is the standard method for incorporating changes that are within the general scope of the contract, ensuring transparency and accountability. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the expanded work without a formal modification, relying on an informal understanding or verbal direction. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure, because it bypasses the required documentation and approval processes. It creates a risk of unauthorized commitments, potential cost overruns that are not properly accounted for, and a lack of clear contractual authority for the additional work. This violates the principles of sound contract administration and the FAR's emphasis on written agreements. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to classify the change as a novation. A novation is used to transfer the entire contract to a new contractor, typically due to a change in the contractor's organizational structure or ownership. It is not a mechanism for modifying the scope of work with the existing contractor. Attempting to use a novation in this context would be a misapplication of a specific contractual tool, demonstrating a lack of understanding of its purpose and regulatory basis, and would fail to address the actual need for a scope adjustment. A third incorrect approach would be to issue a change order without proper justification or a clear understanding of its impact on the contract's overall scope and price. While change orders are a valid modification tool, they are typically used for changes that are within the general scope of the contract. If the expanded work represents a significant deviation or is not clearly within the original scope, a change order might not be the most appropriate or legally defensible mechanism without further analysis, and potentially a supplemental agreement to redefine the scope and price. This could lead to disputes and challenges regarding the validity of the change. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the contract, an assessment of the nature and extent of the proposed change, and consultation with legal counsel and other relevant stakeholders. The contracting officer must identify the most appropriate contractual mechanism for addressing the change, ensuring compliance with all applicable regulations, including the FAR. This involves understanding the distinctions between different types of modifications and their intended uses, and always prioritizing formal, documented agreements that protect the interests of the government and ensure accountability. Question 8. Process analysis reveals that during a source selection for a complex IT service contract, two proposals are under consideration. Offer A presents a technically superior solution, rated highly across all technical factors, but at a significantly higher price. Offer B offers a technically acceptable solution, meeting all minimum requirements but with fewer innovative features and a lower technical rating overall, at a substantially lower price. Solicitation clearly states that technical factors are significantly more important than price, but that price is still a major consideration. The contracting officer must now determine the best value, which approach best aligns with the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, for making this determination. Option A. Award the contract to offeror because its technically superior solution is clearly the best, regardless of the significant price difference. Option B. Reopen discussions with both offerors to negotiate a lower price for offeror A's technically superior proposal, or to enhance offeror B's technical offering to better justify its price. Option C. Conduct a thorough trade-off analysis, documenting how offeror A's superior technical merit justifies its higher price, or conversely, how offeror B's lower price, despite a lower technical rating, represents the best value when considering the defined evaluation criteria and any associated risks. Option D. Award the contract to offeror B because its lower price offers the greatest cost savings to the government, and it meets all minimum technical requirements. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough trade-off analysis, documenting how offeror A's superior technical merit justifies its higher price, or conversely, how offeror B's lower price, despite a lower technical rating, represents the best value when considering the defined evaluation criteria and any associated risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in source selection, where the perceived technical superiority of one proposal is weighed against a significantly lower price from another. The professional challenge lies in adhering strictly to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, principles of best value and fair and impartial evaluation, while also managing potential risks associated with a lower-priced, technically acceptable offer. A contracting officer must ensure that the evaluation is conducted objectively, documented thoroughly, and that any trade-offs are justified based on the stated evaluation criteria and the government's needs. The risk assessment aspect is crucial, as a lower price might indicate a higher risk of performance failure, cost overruns, or unmet requirements if not properly scrutinized. The correct approach involves a thorough best value determination that explicitly considers the trade-offs between technical merit and price, grounded in the solicitation's evaluation factors. This requires a clear articulation of how the higher technical rating of one offeror justifies its higher price, or conversely, how the lower price of another offeror, despite a lower technical rating, still represents the best value to the government when considering the associated risks and the defined evaluation criteria. This aligns with FAR Part 15, which emphasizes that the government should select the offer that represents the best value. Considering price and all non-price evaluation factors, the decision must be documented to demonstrate that the trade-off analysis was rational, reasonable, and in the best interest of the government. An incorrect approach would be to automatically select the lowest-priced offer without a comprehensive evaluation of its technical acceptability and a clear understanding of the risks associated with its lower technical rating. This fails to meet the best value standard and could lead to performance issues. Another incorrect approach would be to select the technically superior offer solely based on its perceived quality without adequately justifying the higher price through a documented trade-off analysis that demonstrates how the added technical value outweighs the cost savings of the lower-priced offer. This could be seen as an arbitrary decision or a failure to achieve economy. Finally, ignoring or downplaying potential risks associated with the lower-priced offer, even if technically acceptable, would be a failure in risk assessment and could lead to a suboptimal outcome for the government. Professionals should approach such situations by first meticulously reviewing the solicitation's evaluation criteria and the relative importance of each factor. They should then conduct a rigorous evaluation of all proposals against these criteria, documenting strengths, weaknesses, and potential risks. The trade-off analysis should be a deliberate process, comparing the value offered by each proposal in relation to its price, and clearly articulating the rationale for selecting one offer over another, especially when price and technical factors diverge significantly. This process ensures fairness, transparency, and ultimately, the selection of the best value for the government. Question 9. The efficiency study reveals that a contracting officer verbally assured a potential vendor during a preliminary discussion that their proposed solution would be selected for an upcoming project, stating, "We're going with your team on this one." The vendor, interpreting this as a commitment, immediately began incurring costs to prepare for the project. However, no formal solicitation was issued and no contract was awarded. Which of the following best describes the legal status of this situation under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR? Option A. A binding contract has been formed because the vendor incurred costs in reliance on the CO's assurance, creating a binding agreement through promissory estoppel. Option B. A binding contract has been formed because the CO's intent to select the vendor was clearly communicated, satisfying the mutual intent requirement for contract formation. Option C. A binding contract has been formed because the CO's statement constituted a clear offer, and the vendor's subsequent actions demonstrated acceptance and consideration. Option D. No binding contract has been formed because the CO's verbal assurance, lacking a formal solicitation and award, does not constitute a legally binding offer under the FAR, and the vendor's actions do not constitute acceptance of a valid offer. The correct answer is C. A binding contract has been formed because the CO's statement constituted a clear offer, and the vendor's subsequent actions demonstrated acceptance and consideration. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in federal contracting, where the line between preliminary discussions and a binding contract can become blurred, especially when dealing with urgent needs and informal communications. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying when a legally binding contract has been formed under the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, and related principles, ensuring that government resources are committed only through proper contractual instruments. Misinterpreting informal exchanges as formal offers or acceptances can lead to unauthorized commitments, potential disputes, and inefficient use of taxpayer funds. The correct approach involves recognizing that a valid contract formation requires a clear offer, unequivocal acceptance, consideration, and mutual intent to be bound. In this case, the contracting officer's informal verbal assurance, while well-intentioned, does not constitute a formal offer that can be accepted to form a binding contract. The FAR emphasizes that contractual obligations are typically established through written solicitations and awards. Vendors' subsequent actions, while demonstrating a willingness to proceed, do not retroactively create a contract where one did not legally exist at the time of the CO's statement. The CO's statement lacked the specificity and formality required for an offer, and the vendor's subsequent work, without a formal award, does not constitute acceptance of a valid offer. An incorrect approach would be to consider the CO's verbal assurance as a binding offer. This fails to acknowledge the FAR's requirements for formal contractual instruments and the need for clear, unambiguous terms. Legally, a verbal assurance from a CO, without a formal solicitation and award, does not create a government obligation to pay for goods or services. Another incorrect approach would be to view the vendor's commencement of work as an acceptance that binds the government. This overlooks the principle that acceptance must be of a valid offer. Without a preceding offer, there can be no acceptance that forms a contract. Furthermore, allowing informal assurances to create contractual obligations would undermine the integrity of the federal acquisition process, which relies on transparency, competition, and documented commitments. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the FAR. When faced with informal discussions that might imply commitment, the professional reasoning process should involve 1. Identifying the specific FAR clauses and principles governing contract formation. 2. Assessing whether the communications meet the legal elements of offer, acceptance, consideration, and mutual intent. 3. Recognizing that informal verbal statements, especially those lacking specificity or formal authority, are generally not binding offers. And 4. ensuring that any commitment of government funds is preceded by a properly executed contractual instrument. In situations of urgency, the CO should clearly communicate the preliminary nature of discussions and the need for a formal award before work commences or is authorized. Question 10. Strategic planning requires a proactive approach to contract administration. A contracting officer's representative, CORE, has identified recurring instances where a contractor's deliverables are consistently late and do not fully meet the specified quality standards outlined in the contract. The COR has held several informal discussions with the contractor's project manager, who acknowledges the issues but offers explanations without concrete plans for improvement. The COR is concerned about the potential impact on the overall project timeline and budget. What is the most appropriate course of action for the COR to ensure contract compliance and protect the government's interests? Option A. Immediately initiate the process for contract termination due to the contractor's persistent failure to meet performance requirements. Option B. Focus on assessing the contractor's overall financial health to determine if they are capable of completing the contract, assuming performance issues are a symptom of financial distress. Option C. Formally notify the contractor in writing of the specific performance deficiencies, referencing the contract clauses, and request a detailed corrective action plan with a defined timeline for implementation. Option D. Continue with informal discussions, trusting the contractor's verbal assurances that they will improve, and document these discussions in personal notes without formal communication to the contractor. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate the process for contract termination due to the contractor's persistent failure to meet performance requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in contract administration, balancing the need for timely project completion with the contractor's adherence to contractual terms and conditions, particularly when performance issues arise. Professional challenge lies in navigating the complexities of contract monitoring, dispute resolution, and compliance assurance without jeopardizing the government's interests or unfairly penalizing the contractor. It requires a nuanced understanding of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, and ethical considerations. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of identifying performance deficiencies, communicating them clearly to the contractor, and working collaboratively towards a resolution while reserving appropriate remedies. This aligns with FAR Part 49, Termination of Contracts, and FAR Part 43, Contract Modifications, which emphasize fair treatment and the importance of documenting all actions. It also reflects the ethical obligation to administer contracts with integrity and in a manner that promotes public trust. An incorrect approach that immediately escalates to termination without attempting to resolve the issues demonstrates a failure to adhere to the principle of progressive discipline and a lack of due diligence. This could lead to unnecessary costs and delays associated with contract termination and reprocurement, and potentially expose the government to legal challenges. It also fails to uphold the FAR's emphasis on providing contractors with opportunities to correct deficiencies. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on the contractor's financial stability without directly addressing the performance issues, misses the core of contract administration. Financial health is a factor. The primary responsibility is to ensure the contractor meets the contractual requirements. Ignoring the performance deficiencies in favor of a broader financial assessment is a dereliction of duty. Finally, an approach that involves informal discussions without documenting the issues or the agreed-upon corrective actions is professionally unsound. This lack of documentation can hinder future oversight, create ambiguity, and make it difficult to enforce corrective measures or justify subsequent actions if performance does not improve. It undermines the transparency and accountability required in government contracting. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve 1. Thoroughly reviewing the contract terms and performance requirements. 2. Documenting all observed performance deficiencies with specific examples and dates. 3. Communicating these deficiencies to the contractor in writing, referencing the relevant contract clauses. 4. Collaborating with the contractor to develop and agree upon a corrective action plan, including timelines. 5. Monitoring the contractor's progress against the plan and providing feedback. 6. Escalating actions, including potential remedies outlined in the FAR, only if the contractor fails to implement the corrective actions or if the deficiencies persist. Question 11. The monitoring system demonstrates that a contractor is consistently delivering services that do not fully meet the technical specifications outlined in a firm fixed-price contract. The contracting officer representative, COR, has observed these deviations over several weeks and has gathered detailed documentation of the non-conforming deliverables. The COR believes the deviations are significant enough to warrant a discussion about potential contract remedies, but is unsure of the immediate next steps. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and compliant approach for the COR? Option A. The COR should formally notify the contracting officer, CO, of the observed performance issues, providing all supporting documentation and requesting guidance on how to proceed, while refraining from unilaterally accepting the non-conforming work or directing changes. Option B. The COR should immediately recommend contract termination to the CO based on the observed deviations, without further investigation or discussion with the contractor. Option C. The COR should inform the contractor that the delivered services are unacceptable and demand immediate correction, potentially withholding payment without consulting the CO. Option D. The COR should accept the non-conforming services as delivered, assuming the contractor will address the issues in future deliveries, and document the deviations for future reference. The correct answer is A. The COR should formally notify the contracting officer, CO, of the observed performance issues, providing all supporting documentation and requesting guidance on how to proceed, while refraining from unilaterally accepting the non-conforming work or directing changes. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the distinct yet interconnected roles and responsibilities within the federal acquisition process, specifically concerning contract oversight and performance management. The core challenge lies in correctly identifying who possesses the ultimate authority and responsibility for ensuring contractor performance aligns with contract terms, especially when potential deviations are identified. Misinterpreting these roles can lead to ineffective oversight, contractual disputes, and potential waste of government funds. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between advisory, monitoring, and decision-making authorities. The correct approach involves the contracting officer representative, COR, meticulously documenting the observed performance issues and formally communicating them to the contracting officer, CO. This aligns with best professional practice because the COR's primary role, as defined by Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 1, 602-2 and agency-specific guidance, is to monitor contractor performance and ensure compliance with contract terms. The COR is the CO's eyes and ears on the ground. However, the COR does not have the authority to unilaterally direct changes to the contract, approve deviations, or make final determinations on contractual remedies. Their responsibility is to report, document, and advise. The CO, conversely, is vested with the authority and responsibility to manage the contract, interpret its terms, and make all decisions regarding contract performance, including accepting non-conforming work with appropriate adjustments, directing corrective actions, or initiating contract modifications or termination. By formally notifying the CO, the COR ensures that the appropriate authority is aware of the situation and can exercise their mandated responsibilities. An incorrect approach would be for the COR to attempt to resolve the performance issues directly with the contractor by accepting the non-conforming work without consulting the CO. This fails to recognize the COR's lack of authority to accept deviations or make final contractual decisions. The FAR explicitly states that CORs cannot obligate the government or make changes to contract terms. Another incorrect approach would be for the COR to ignore the performance issues, assuming the contractor will self-correct. This violates the COR's fundamental responsibility to monitor and report. The COR is ethically and regulatorily obligated to bring potential issues to the CO's attention to protect the government's interests. A third incorrect approach would be for the COR to immediately recommend contract termination to the CO without first thoroughly documenting the issues and exploring less severe remedies, such as directing corrective action. While termination is a CO's prerogative, the COR's role is to provide factual information and recommendations based on observed performance, allowing the CO to make an informed decision after considering all contractual options. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of one's own authorities and limitations, as well as those of other acquisition personnel, When performance issues arise, the professional should 1. Observe and meticulously document the specific deviations from contract requirements. 2. Assess the impact of the deviations on contract objectives. 3. Consult the contract clauses and relevant FAR provisions to understand the contractual rights and obligations. 4. Communicate findings and concerns clearly and factually to the contracting officer, providing all supporting documentation. 5. Follow the CO's direction and provide further assistance as requested in managing the situation. This systematic approach ensures that actions are taken within the bounds of regulatory authority and ethical conduct, safeguarding government resources and ensuring contract success. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows that a contracting officer is considering acquiring office supplies with an estimated value of $4,500. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the Federal Acquisition Certification in Contracting FAC Regulatory Framework for Simplified Acquisition Procedures, SAP? Option A. Sole sourcing the requirement to a known vendor without seeking any competitive quotations, citing convenience. Option B. Utilizing the micro-purchase threshold procedures to issue a purchase order after obtaining oral quotations from multiple vendors to ensure price reasonableness and documenting the selection. Option C. Negotiating a complex contract under FAR Part 15, as it allows for greater flexibility in defining terms and conditions. Option D. Employing the full sealed bidding process outlined in FAR Part 14, as it is the most transparent method. The correct answer is B. Utilizing the micro-purchase threshold procedures to issue a purchase order after obtaining oral quotations from multiple vendors to ensure price reasonableness and documenting the selection. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in federal contracting, ensuring compliance with simplified acquisition procedures, SAP, while managing the acquisition of goods or services that fall within specific dollar thresholds. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying the appropriate SAP method and adhering to the associated documentation requirements, which are designed to promote efficiency and economy for smaller purchases. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to procedural errors, potential protests, and inefficient use of government resources. Careful judgment is required to balance the need for speed and simplicity with the imperative of regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves selecting the most appropriate SAP method based on the estimated dollar value and the nature of the acquisition, and then meticulously documenting the process according to Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 13. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the intent of SAP to simplify and expedite the acquisition of supplies and services up to the simplified acquisition threshold. Specifically, FAR 13.003 outlines the policies and procedures for SAP, emphasizing the use of methods like micro-purchase or the use of purchase orders for acquisitions below certain thresholds. Proper documentation, as detailed in FAR 13.106 and other relevant sections, ensures transparency, accountability, and auditability, which are fundamental ethical and regulatory requirements in federal contracting. An incorrect approach would be to bypass the formal SAP process entirely and use a non-competitive sole source justification for an acquisition that clearly falls within SAP thresholds and could be competed. This is a regulatory failure because it circumvents the established procedures designed to ensure fair and open competition, even for smaller dollar amounts. It also fails to leverage the efficiency benefits intended by SAP. Another incorrect approach would be to use a standard, more complex contracting method, like sealed bidding or negotiated procurement under FAR Part 15, for an acquisition that qualifies for SAP. This is an ethical and professional failure because it is inefficient and unnecessarily burdensome, contradicting the core principles of SAP, which are to reduce administrative burden and expedite purchases for smaller value acquisitions. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the regulatory framework designed to optimize acquisition processes. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to proceed with an acquisition under SAP without adequate documentation of the price reasonableness determination or the basis for award. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. FAR 13.106-3 requires contracting officers to determine price reasonableness, and the documentation of this determination is crucial for oversight and accountability. Failure to document this can lead to findings of non-compliance during audits and can undermine confidence in the contracting process. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the estimated dollar value of the acquisition and the nature of the supplies or services required. The contracting officer must then consult FAR Part 13 to identify the most appropriate SAP method. This involves considering thresholds for micro-purchases, simplified purchases using purchase orders, and the requirements for obtaining quotations or proposals. Crucially, the process must include a clear and documented determination of price reasonableness, ensuring that the government is obtaining fair and equitable prices. Adherence to documentation requirements at each step is paramount for compliance and ethical conduct. Question 13. Upon reviewing a bid protest filed by a contractor challenging the evaluation of their proposal, what is the most appropriate initial action for a contracting officer to take to ensure compliance with federal acquisition regulations? Option A. Contact the protester directly to request additional information to clarify their protest grounds before initiating formal procedures. Option B. Immediately issue a decision denying the protest based on a preliminary assessment of the protester's past performance. Option C. Proceed with award of the contract to the apparent successful offeror while the protest is being reviewed. Option D. Acknowledge receipt of the protest and initiate the process for obtaining an agency report as prescribed by FAR Part 33. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a decision denying the protest based on a preliminary assessment of the protester's past performance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires a contracting officer to navigate the complex and time-sensitive process of bid protests while adhering strictly to the federal acquisition regulation, FAR. The challenge lies in balancing the protester's right to a fair review with the agency's need to proceed with the acquisition efficiently and effectively. Misinterpreting or misapplying protest procedures can lead to significant delays, increased costs, and potential legal repercussions, undermining the integrity of the procurement process. Careful judgment is required to ensure all procedural steps are followed accurately and within the prescribed timelines. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of the protest allegations against the solicitation requirements and the agency's evaluation record. This includes acknowledging receipt of the protest, requesting a report from the agency, and providing the protester an opportunity to respond to the agency's report. This methodical process ensures that all relevant information is considered and that a well-reasoned decision can be made based on the facts and applicable regulations. Specifically, FAR Part 33, Protests, Debarments, and Suspensions, outlines the detailed procedures for handling protests, including timelines for agency reports and GAO reviews. Adhering to these procedures is not only a regulatory requirement, but also an ethical imperative to ensure fairness and transparency in government contracting. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the protest without a proper review, citing a perceived lack of merit without conducting an investigation. This fails to uphold the protester's right to due process and violates FAR 33, 104A, 1, which mandates that an agency shall not consider a protest to be frivolous if it is timely filed and alleges a violation of statute or regulation. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the agency report beyond the stipulated FAR deadlines without proper justification. This can lead to the protest being transferred to the Government Accountability Office (GAO) for resolution, potentially causing significant delays and increasing the cost of the protest resolution. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of diligence and respect for the protest process. A third incorrect approach would be to make a decision on the protest based on informal discussions or assumptions, rather than a documented review of the procurement record and the solicitation. This undermines the integrity of the decision-making process and is contrary to the principles of accountability and transparency required by federal acquisition regulations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, immediately acknowledge receipt of the protest and confirm its timeliness. Second, initiate the process for obtaining the agency report as outlined in FAR 33, 104B. Third, conduct a comprehensive and objective review of the protest allegations, the solicitation, the evaluation criteria, and the agency's evaluation documentation. Fourth, provide the protester with an opportunity to comment on the agency report. Finally, Render a decision based on the complete record and applicable regulations, ensuring the decision is well documented and communicated appropriately. This structured approach ensures compliance with regulatory requirements and promotes fairness and efficiency in protest resolution. Question 14. The monitoring system demonstrates that a contractor has submitted a proposal with a significantly lower initial price than anticipated, but the proposal lacks detailed cost breakdowns and includes vague language regarding potential future adjustments. The contracting officer suspects this pricing strategy may obscure the true total cost to the government over the contract's performance period. Which of the following actions best upholds the principles of contract pricing and cost analysis under the FACC framework? Option A. Proceed with the contract award based on the initial proposal, relying on the contractor's good faith to manage costs and inform the government of any necessary adjustments. Option B. Conduct a thorough cost analysis of the contractor's proposal, scrutinizing all cost elements and the basis for the proposed price, and engage in further negotiation to ensure a fair and reasonable total cost. Option C. Inform the contractor that the proposal is unacceptable due to the lack of detail, and request a revised proposal with a higher price that better reflects market value. Option D. Accept the lower initial price to secure a favorable immediate cost, assuming the contractor has factored in all potential future expenses. The correct answer is D. Accept the lower initial price to secure a favorable immediate cost, assuming the contractor has factored in all potential future expenses. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between achieving a seemingly favorable contract price and upholding the integrity of the contracting process. The contracting officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure fairness, transparency, and compliance with federal regulations. The core of the dilemma lies in the contractor's proposed pricing strategy, which appears to offer a lower initial cost but may obscure the true total cost to the government over the life of the contract. The correct approach involves a thorough cost analysis to understand the contractor's proposed pricing structure and to identify any potential hidden costs or risks. This means scrutinizing the basis of the proposed price, including direct costs, indirect costs, and profit. The contracting officer must ensure that the price is fair and reasonable, reflecting the true value of the goods or services being acquired. This aligns with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 15, which mandates that contracting officers obtain cost or pricing data and perform cost analysis to determine fair and reasonable pricing. Specifically, FAR 15. 404-1. C outlines the requirements for cost analysis, emphasizing the need to evaluate the individual cost elements and the relationship of each element to the total price. Ethical considerations also demand that the government does not exploit a contractor's potential lack of understanding or, inadvertently, accept a price that is unsustainable or leads to cost overruns later. An incorrect approach would be to accept the contractor's proposed price solely because it appears lower upfront without conducting a proper cost analysis. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for ensuring a fair and reasonable price, and could lead to the government paying more in the long run due to unacknowledged escalation clauses, inadequate performance incentives, or other factors not fully disclosed. Another incorrect approach would be to pressure the contractor to reduce the price further without a basis in cost analysis, which could be considered unethical and potentially coercive, undermining the integrity of the negotiation process. Finally, ignoring the potential for future cost increases or the contractor's profit margin and simply focusing on the immediate price reduction would be a failure to perform a comprehensive cost analysis as required by FAR. Professionals should approach such situations by adhering to a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Fully understanding the regulatory requirements for contract pricing and cost analysis. 2. Meticulously reviewing all submitted cost data. 3. Engaging in open and transparent communication with the contractor to clarify any ambiguities. 4. Performing a robust cost analysis to determine the reasonableness of the proposed price, considering all potential cost drivers and risks. And 5. Documenting the entire process and the rationale for the final pricing decision. This systematic approach ensures compliance, fairness, and the best value for the government. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that a proposed small business set-aside contract for specialized IT services appears to be awarded to a firm that may not be able to perform the majority of the work independently, potentially relying heavily on a large, non-small business subcontractor. The contracting officer is aware of this potential issue, but is also under pressure to meet annual small business contracting goals. What is the most appropriate course of action for the contracting officer? Option A. Proceed with the set-aside, assuming the small business will find a way to manage the subcontracting and meet the goals, and address any performance issues later. Option B. Advise the small business to restructure its ownership or subcontracting arrangements to appear more compliant with small business requirements before proceeding with the set-aside. Option C. Immediately cancel the set-aside and proceed with a full and open competition, without further investigation into the small business's capabilities or size status. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the small business's proposed subcontracting plan and its demonstrated capability to perform the core requirements of the contract, consulting with the Small Business Administration, SBA, if necessary, before making a final decision on the set-aside. Correct answer is A. Proceed with the set-aside, assuming the small business will find a way to manage the subcontracting and meet the goals, and address any performance issues later. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between achieving a seemingly beneficial outcome, supporting a small business, and adhering to the strict requirements of federal acquisition regulations, specifically concerning small business set-aside programs. The contracting officer, CO, is under pressure to meet small business goals, but must do so within the legal and regulatory framework. Misinterpreting or circumventing these regulations can lead to significant legal, ethical, and financial repercussions, including contract protests, loss of trust, and personal disciplinary action. Careful judgment is required to balance program objectives with compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the contract requirements and the capabilities of the identified small business to ensure it is a true small business and capable of performing the work without undue reliance on other firms. This aligns with the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 19, which governs small business programs. Specifically, the CO must verify the small business's size status and its ability to perform the contract requirements independently. If the small business is not capable of performing the majority of the work itself, or if its size status is questionable, a set-aside may not be appropriate, and the CO must follow the prescribed procedures for addressing such issues, which might include re-evaluating the set-aside or seeking clarification from the Small Business Administration, SBA. This approach upholds regulatory integrity and ensures fair competition. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the set-aside without verifying the small business's capability or size status, simply to meet a perceived goal. This violates FAR 19-202-1, which mandates that contracting officers ensure that set-aside contracts are awarded to eligible small businesses that can perform the work. Failing to verify capability can lead to contract performance issues and potential fraud if the small business is not genuinely capable or eligible. Another incorrect approach would be to pressure the small business to find a way to meet the requirements or to accept the contract despite known deficiencies. This is unethical and potentially illegal, as it can be construed as coercion and may lead to misrepresentation of the small business's capabilities or size status. It undermines the integrity of the small business program and the acquisition process. A further incorrect approach would be to unilaterally decide that the small business is capable without documented evidence or consultation with relevant authorities like the SBA. This bypasses established procedures for verifying eligibility and capability, leaving the set-aside vulnerable to protest and potentially invalidating the award. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Clearly understanding the regulatory requirements for small business set-asides, FAR Part 19. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence to verify the eligibility and capability of the proposed small business. 3. Documenting all findings and decisions. 4. Consulting with legal counsel or the SBA when uncertainties arise. 5. Prioritizing compliance and ethical conduct over the appearance of meeting goals. Question 16. Examination of the data shows a contractor has proposed a new methodology for allocating a significant indirect cost pool, citing a change in their business operations that they assert makes the previous allocation method less reflective of actual resource consumption. The proposed method, however, appears to shift a greater portion of this indirect cost to government contracts compared to historical allocations. The contractor's justification is primarily based on internal accounting system adjustments rather than a clear demonstration of increased benefit to government contracts. As the contracting officer, what is the most appropriate approach to address this proposed cost allocation? Option A. Approve the contractor's proposed allocation methodology, assuming their internal accounting adjustments and assertion of GAAP compliance are sufficient justification for the change. Option B. Advise the contractor to revert to their previous, historical allocation methodology to maintain consistency and avoid potential cost increases to government contracts, regardless of the contractor's current business operations. Option C. Reject the contractor's proposed allocation methodology outright, citing the deviation from historical practices and the apparent increase in cost allocation to government contracts without further investigation. Option D. Conduct a detailed review of the contractor's proposed allocation methodology, requesting specific documentation and justification to determine if the new method is reasonable, allocable to government contracts in accordance with FAR Part 31, and accurately reflects resource consumption. The correct answer is A. Approve the contractor's proposed allocation methodology, assuming their internal accounting adjustments and assertion of GAAP compliance are sufficient justification for the change. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a contracting officer to apply the FAR's cost principles to a complex situation involving a contractor's indirect costs. The challenge lies in discerning whether the contractor's proposed allocation methodology for a specific indirect cost pool is both reasonable and allocable, especially when it deviates from historical practices and appears to disproportionately benefit the contractor's commercial work. A contracting officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure that federal funds are used efficiently and appropriately, adhering strictly to the FAR's guidance on cost allowability. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the contractor's proposed cost allocation methodology against the criteria outlined in FAR Part 31, specifically focusing on reasonableness, allocability, and compliance with generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. This approach requires the contracting officer to understand the nature of the indirect cost, the contractor's business operations, both government and commercial, and the rationale behind the proposed change in allocation. The contracting officer must then determine if the proposed method accurately reflects the consumption of resources by the government contract. FAR 31, 201-2. A mandates that costs must be reasonable and allocable to be allowable. FAR 31, 201-3 defines reasonableness, and FAR 31, 201-4 defines allocability. The contractor's justification for the change and its impact on the government contract must be critically evaluated to ensure the cost is not artificially inflated or shifted to the government. An incorrect approach would be to automatically approve the contractor's proposed allocation simply because it is presented as a change in their accounting system, or because the contractor asserts it is compliant with GAAP. This fails to meet the contracting officer's responsibility to independently verify the allowability of costs charged to the government. Another incorrect approach would be to reject the proposed allocation without a detailed analysis of its merits and the contractor's justification, potentially leading to an adversarial relationship and disputes. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the contractor's historical allocation methods without considering whether the current business environment or the nature of the indirect cost necessitates a revised, more accurate allocation. This ignores the dynamic nature of business and the FAR's emphasis on reflecting actual resource consumption. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific indirect cost in question and the contractor's business activities. They should then request detailed documentation from the contractor explaining the proposed change in allocation methodology, including the rationale, the accounting principles supporting it, and its impact on both government and commercial contracts. The contracting officer must then critically analyze this information against the FAR's cost principles, particularly FAR 31, 201-2, 31, 201-3, and 31, 201-4, to determine if the proposed allocation is reasonable, allocable, and ultimately allowable. Engaging in open communication with the contractor to seek clarification and further justification is also a key part of the professional decision-making process. Question 17. Assessment of how a newly implemented agency-wide acquisition management system supports the federal acquisition certification in contracting FAC requirements, specifically concerning the continuous professional development and competency demonstration of contracting officers and specialists. Option A. The agency should focus solely on the system's ability to streamline transactional processes, assuming that individual contracting professionals are solely responsible for meeting their FACC requirements independently. Option B. The agency should implement the system and then conduct a post-implementation review to determine if any FACC-related functionalities need to be retrofitted, without proactive integration during the initial deployment. Option C. The agency must ensure the system provides integrated access to FACC training modules, tracks individual progress towards certification requirements, and offers tools to apply and document the acquisition competencies learned, thereby aligning operational efficiency with professional development mandates. Option D. The agency can consider FACC compliance as a secondary consideration, prioritizing the system's technological features and user interface over its capacity to support the certification and ongoing development of the acquisition workforce. The correct answer is C. The agency must ensure the system provides integrated access to FACC training modules, tracks individual progress towards certification requirements, and offers tools to apply and document the acquisition competencies learned, thereby aligning operational efficiency with professional development mandates. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in federal contracting, ensuring that a newly implemented acquisition system aligns with the federal acquisition certification in contracting FAC requirements and effectively supports contracting professionals. The challenge lies in balancing the operational needs of the agency with the mandated training and certification standards. A critical aspect is understanding that FACC is not merely a training program, but a framework for ensuring competency and ethical conduct in federal contracting. The agency must demonstrate that its system facilitates, rather than hinders, the achievement and maintenance of these competencies. The correct approach involves a proactive and integrated strategy. This means the agency must actively assess how the new system supports the development and demonstration of FACC competencies. This includes ensuring the system provides access to relevant training resources, tracks progress towards certification requirements, and facilitates the application of learned principles in daily contracting activities. Regulatory justification stems from the overarching goal of FACC, which is to enhance the professionalism and effectiveness of the federal acquisition workforce. An agency system should be designed to foster this, aligning with FAR Part 1, 102-1 Policies and Goals, which emphasizes efficiency and effectiveness in acquisition. Ethically, it demonstrates the agency's commitment to developing a competent and ethical workforce. An incorrect approach would be to assume that simply deploying a new system fulfills the agency's obligations. This fails to address the core purpose of FACC. Another incorrect approach is to view FACC as solely an individual responsibility, neglecting the agency's role in providing the necessary infrastructure and support for its acquisition workforce to meet certification requirements. This overlooks the agency's responsibility to foster a compliant and competent workforce, as implied by the Federal Acquisition Institute's FAC role in developing and managing FACC. A further incorrect approach is to prioritize system functionality over the FACC requirements, leading to a system that may be technologically advanced but fails to support the professional development and certification of contracting personnel. This creates a disconnect between operational tools and the mandated professional standards, potentially leading to non-compliance and reduced workforce capability. Professionals should approach such implementation challenges by first thoroughly understanding the FACC requirements and their implications for the acquisition workforce. This involves consulting FAI guidance and relevant FAR clauses. Next, they should conduct a gap analysis between the proposed system's capabilities and the FACC requirements. The decision-making process should then focus on integrating FACC support into the system's design and implementation, ensuring that training, tracking, and application of knowledge are facilitated. This requires collaboration between acquisition professionals, IT specialists, and training personnel to ensure a holistic and compliant solution. Question 18. which approach would be most effective for a contracting officer seeking to acquire specialized IT services that are readily available through multiple existing GWAC and MAS contracts, while ensuring compliance with acquisition regulations and achieving best value for the government. Option A. Modify an existing GWAC or MAS contract to include additional services not originally contemplated to better fit the agency's unique requirements. Option B. Immediately place an order against the GWAC or MAS contract that appears to offer the most favorable pricing without further analysis of specific needs or market conditions. Option C. Initiate a new competitive solicitation outside of existing GWAC and MAS, as this guarantees maximum competition. Option D. Conduct a thorough needs assessment and market research to identify the most suitable GWAC or MAS contracts. Evaluate the competitive landscape within those vehicles, and document the rationale for selecting a specific contract and vendor based on best value. The correct answer is B. Immediately place an order against the GWAC or MAS contract that appears to offer the most favorable pricing, without further analysis of specific needs or market conditions. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a contracting professional to balance the efficiency benefits of leveraging existing government-wide acquisition contracts, GWAC, and multiple award schedules, MAS, with the fundamental principles of fair and open competition, and ensuring the government obtains the best value. Misjudging the appropriate use of these contract vehicles can lead to protests, waste of taxpayer funds, and a failure to meet agency needs effectively. Careful judgment is required to determine when these vehicles are truly the most advantageous and compliant path. The correct approach involves a thorough analysis of the agency's specific needs, market research to understand available solutions, and a determination of whether the requirements can be met through existing GWAC or MAS contracts in a manner that is still competitive and provides best value. This approach aligns with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 16 and Part 8, which encourage the use of established contract vehicles to streamline acquisition, but do not mandate their use when other methods might be more appropriate or when specific conditions are not met. It emphasizes due diligence in ensuring that using a GWAC or MAS is not merely a shortcut, but a strategic decision that serves the government's interests, including fair competition and value. An incorrect approach that bypasses a needs assessment and market research to solely rely on the perceived ease of using a GWAC or MAS is professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct proper due diligence violates the core principles of acquisition, which mandate that contracting officers must ensure they are meeting the government's needs effectively and efficiently. Specifically, it risks violating FAR 15, 304 evaluation factors and significant subfactors, and FAR 15, 404-1, determining price reasonableness, if the chosen vehicle does not offer competitive pricing or suitable solutions. Another incorrect approach that involves modifying a GWAC or MAS contract beyond its scope to fit unique requirements circumvents the established processes for those vehicles and can lead to protests and legal challenges, as it essentially creates a new, non-competitively awarded contract under the guise of an existing one. This also disregards the intent of GWAC and MAS as pre-competed vehicles. Professional reasoning in such situations should involve a structured decision-making process. First, clearly define the agency's requirements. Second, conduct comprehensive market research to identify potential solutions, including those available through GWAC and MAS, as well as other acquisition methods. Third, evaluate the suitability and competitiveness of offerings under GWAC and MAS against the defined requirements and market alternatives. Fourth, document the rationale for the chosen acquisition strategy, demonstrating how it best serves the government's interests, including competition, best value, and compliance with the FAR. Question 19. Implementation of a new critical IT system requires a competitive procurement. The contracting officer responsible for this procurement discovers that their sibling is a senior executive at one of the prime contracting firms submitting a proposal. What is the most appropriate course of action to uphold ethics in government contracting and procurement integrity? Option A. Inform their supervisor that the relationship is distant and unlikely to influence their professional judgment, and continue with the procurement. Option B. Proceed with the procurement, ensuring all decisions are made objectively and documenting the rationale thoroughly to demonstrate impartiality. Option C. Continue with the procurement but avoid direct communication with the siblings company to minimize any perceived influence. Option D. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their supervisor and recuse themselves from all aspects of the procurement process related to this contractor. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their supervisor and recuse themselves from all aspects of the procurement process related to this contractor. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a contracting officer to navigate a situation where a personal relationship could be perceived as influencing official duties, thereby potentially violating ethical standards and procurement integrity principles. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and public trust in the contracting process. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the relationship to the appropriate authority and recusing oneself from any involvement in the procurement process concerning the contractor. This aligns with the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 3, Improper Business Practices and Personal Conflicts of Interest, specifically FAR 3-101-1, General Policy, which emphasizes the importance of avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. It also upholds the principles of procurement integrity, ensuring fair and impartial competition. By disclosing and recusing, the contracting officer demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and protects the integrity of the government's acquisition process. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the procurement without disclosure, believing that the personal relationship would not influence their decision. This fails to acknowledge the appearance of impropriety, which can be as damaging as an actual conflict of interest. It violates FAR 3-101-1 by not avoiding the appearance of impropriety and potentially compromises procurement integrity by creating a perception of favoritism. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the relationship to their supervisor. This is a failure to be transparent and honest, which are fundamental ethical requirements. It also prevents the agency from taking appropriate steps to mitigate any potential conflict, leaving the procurement vulnerable to scrutiny and undermining public trust. A third incorrect approach would be to continue with the procurement, but attempt to justify any decisions made as purely objective, despite the undisclosed relationship. This is a flawed reasoning process because it assumes personal objectivity can overcome the appearance of bias. The FAR and ethical standards require proactive measures to prevent conflicts, not reactive justifications after the fact. This approach fails to uphold the standards of conduct expected of federal employees and jeopardizes procurement integrity. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant ethical regulations, particularly those concerning conflicts of interest and procurement integrity. When faced with a potential conflict, the contracting officer should first identify the nature of the relationship and its potential impact on their official duties. Next, they should consult the applicable regulations, e.g., FAR Part 3, and agency-specific guidance. The crucial step is to err on the side of caution by disclosing the situation to their supervisor or designated ethics official and seeking guidance on appropriate action, which often includes recusal from any decision-making processes. This proactive and transparent approach is essential for maintaining professional integrity and public confidence. Question 20. Governance review demonstrates that a contract for specialized IT services is nearing its performance end date. The contractor has submitted a final invoice, and the contracting officer's representative, CORE, has verbally confirmed that the services were performed satisfactorily. However, the formal acceptance documentation has not yet been signed by the designated government official, and the contractor has not yet provided the final training materials as stipulated in the contract. The contracting officer is considering processing the final payment and closing the contract to meet internal metrics for timely closeout. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and compliant approach to contract closeout? Option A. Withhold final payment and delay contract closeout until formal acceptance documentation is signed and the final training materials are received and reviewed by the government. Option B. Process the final payment and close the contract, assuming the signed acceptance and training materials will be provided shortly after. Option C. Process the final payment based on the COR's verbal confirmation and close the contract, initiating a separate process to track the outstanding training materials. Option D. Close the contract and issue a modification to deobligate any remaining funds, with the understanding that the contractor will provide the training materials post-closeout. The correct answer is B. Process the final payment and close the contract, assuming the signed acceptance and training materials will be provided shortly after. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in contract closeout, balancing the need for timely closure with the imperative to ensure all contractual obligations and regulatory requirements are met. The professional challenge lies in identifying the precise point at which a contract can be considered fully completed and closed, especially when minor administrative tasks remain. Careful judgment is required to avoid premature closure, which could lead to unfulfilled obligations or missed opportunities for recouping funds, and to avoid undue delay, which can negatively impact agency efficiency and contractor relationships. The correct approach involves meticulously verifying that all contractual deliverables have been received and accepted, all payments have been made, and all required documentation for records retention has been properly filed in accordance with Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR Part 4. 8. Government property and any agency-specific closeout procedures. This ensures compliance with the FAR's mandate for proper contract closure, safeguarding government interests and maintaining accurate contract records. An incorrect approach that proceeds with final payment and closure before confirming the physical return or disposition of all government property, as required by FAR 45. 607, represents a significant regulatory failure. This oversight could lead to the loss of valuable government assets and non-compliance with property accountability regulations. Another incorrect approach that closes the contract without ensuring all invoices have been submitted and processed, and without verifying that all contract terms have been satisfied, violates the principles of proper financial closeout and could result in the government overpaying or failing to pay the contractor appropriately, leading to potential disputes and audit findings. Finally, an incorrect approach that relies solely on the contractor's assertion of completion without independent verification by the contracting officer or their designated representative fails to uphold the contracting officer's responsibility for ensuring contract completion as outlined in FAR 4. 804. This abdication of responsibility can lead to incomplete closeouts and potential future liabilities. Professionals should employ a systematic checklist approach during contract closeout, cross-referencing contract terms, FAR requirements, and agency policies. This involves proactive communication with the contractor and internal stakeholders, thorough documentation review, and independent verification of all closeout actions before formally closing the contract.